Welcome to another edition of Motorsports Today. We are live every Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. on our flagship radio home, 88.7 WRSU FM New Brunswick in New Jersey, available on the web at WRSU.org. We're also live on Mondays from 7 to 8 p.m. on TikTok. You can find every episode on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on the web at motorsportstoday.net and follow us on the socials at Motorsports Today. Eddie Kalegi here with you. Thanksgiving approaching, and now the new annual tradition in the motorsports world is the Las Vegas Grand Prix the weekend before Thanksgiving. That is happening tomorrow night. Cars were on track last night. We're going to talk about it. We're going to get you set for the race. A lot of other news and notes going on in Formula One, in NASCAR as well. NASCAR already 3 weeks into the offseason, just over 2 months to go until the Clash. Got a lot to get to, so let's take you through what you might have missed since we were last on the air on Monday with our pit stop. Some quick news from IndyCar announced this week, reported by Adam Stern, that Mick Schumacher, former F1 driver who tested an IndyCar at the Indianapolis road course last month, is officially leaving the World Endurance Championship. He's competed in WEC for Alpine each of the last 2 years, and Schumacher will begin his quest to ultimately earn a seat on the IndyCar grid. That reported by Adam Stern yesterday. Formula One, 2 practices last night in Las Vegas. A little bit of rain, surprisingly, in Paradise, Nevada, threw a wrench in some plans. Everybody ran only about 13 to 15 laps in practice too. Lando Norris nearly found the barrier in that session, but did post the fastest time in second practice. Ferrari, though, controlled the way in the opening practice. That's the larger sample size, with Charles Leclerc running 28 laps, the second most of any driver, and ended up pacing the session ahead of Alex Albon and both Red Bulls, who were quick. Max Verstappen actually a half a tenth slower than Yuki Tsunoda as they slotted in third and fourth. And then in NASCAR news, announced this week that Ryan Sieg Racing will be moving to Chevrolet from Ford. They will maintain their same drivers in Ryan and Kyle Sieg for 2026, but another Ford team moves over to Chevy. That's our pit stop, and that's where I really wanted to start this episode today, because it's an underrated move. It's an underrated story that wasn't really talked about. It reminds me a lot of, everybody's seen that clip from First Take a few years ago when Brian Windhorst is like, there's a very weird trade in the NBA, and it was the Utah Jazz, basically that it was a precursor to them ultimately trading away Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert and breaking up their team. But this is a very weird move, and not that many people talked about it, and it just kind of happened 2 days ago. So it was already well known at the end of the season that Haas factory team, what Stewart Haas Racing used to be, was moving to Chevrolet. Now, Chevy was originally the base manufacturer for SHR before they moved to a Ford alliance in 2017, right after Tony Stewart retired from driving. Ryan Sieg Racing was the other multi-car Ford team in the Xfinity Series, now the O'Reilly Series next year, and that will no longer be the case as they are moving to Chevrolet. They're moving to Hendrick Engines. They're moving to North Carolina, and they now will be aligned with Haas factory team. And it brings into question something that I've wanted to talk about on this show, that it's due to be discussed at this point. Chevrolet has all of these teams, all of these development teams. Plus, you've got, of course, Junior Motorsports, and you've got Spire now in trucks. Toyota may have lost KBM, but they have their ARCA program to start the pipeline young. Then they've got Tricon in trucks, obviously JGR in the secondary series. Ford doesn't have that. I truly believe Ford is starting to have a driver development problem, and this has festered for quite a few years now. This dates all the way back, in my opinion, to when Brad Keselowski Racing got out of the truck series. Think about how much talent was fostered from there. Austin Cindric, Chase Briscoe, Tyler Reddick, Ryan Blaney, all drove for BKR, all in the Cup Series right now. That team ceases to exist. There's not too much in trucks for Ford. There's Thor Sport, but that's usually where the truck lifers race. There's Front Row Motorsports. I'll get to them in a second. The Xfinity Series, years ago, Penske, Roush, they had full-time programs, and they developed talent. Chris Buescher, Austin Cindric, now both racing for Ford in the Cup Series, and that doesn't exist anymore. You at least had Haas, and you had Ryan Sieg Racing, which wasn't much, but it was something. And now AM Racing, and that's pretty much it. There's no presence of Ford in the secondary series. How can you be a serious OEM and not have a clear development line? And listen, Ford has won 3 of the last 4 championships. You can't deny that in the Cup Series. But a lot of these drivers are aging. Logano's 35, Brad's approaching 40, Ryan Preece is 36, and there's just nothing in the pipeline for this manufacturer, which I think needs to be concerning. And you lose Stewart Haas Racing as an anchor team. Front Row Motorsports is trying to be that team, but I don't know what their future holds. They're the most promising development line. Of course, they have Lane Riggs in the Truck Series right now, but if things happen with this lawsuit, how invested is Bob Jenkins seriously going to be in this team? I truly believe if things don't work out the way that he wants them to, I don't know how involved Bob Jenkins is going to be in his NASCAR effort moving forward, because Bob Jenkins has taken that team from a start and park organization to a relevant team that's had multiple playoff berths, a Daytona 500 win, and he hasn't really seen the slice of pie, for lack of a better word, grow for him or get bigger because of the way the charter agreement is. So you have your only development team that exists, first of all, is in the Truck Series, and second of all, involves someone who is suing the sport right now and isn't happy with the direction that things are going. I really am concerned about the future of Ford at this point. They have no path to developing drivers. And after a while, you can only get so much in free agency, because with sponsorships and other contract restrictions, it is not that easy to sign a driver away from Chevy or Toyota. The way Ford has capitalized at times through the years, particularly in filling up their roster when they actually had Xfinity teams, was taking advantage of the fact that Toyota just had so many different teams and drivers at the development level and not enough places to put them up top that they end up pivoting to other teams. Exhibit A, Harrison Burton. So there's opportunity certainly for Ford, but I just look at their current roster construction. I mean, you have Penske, which is not changing anytime soon. You have RFK, where, listen, I love their driver lineup. I still think Brad Keselowski has stuff left in the tank if that car's right. I think Chris Buescher is a really talented driver, even though he's missed the playoffs the last 2 years. Ryan Preece had a career resurgence this year. But how does that lineup truly stack up when you look at these other teams? It's definitely worse than Hendrick. It's worse than Penske. It's worse than Gibbs. I'd say it's worse than 2311. And now with Zilich, it's worse than Trackhouse. So at best, that's the 6th best driver lineup in the Cup Series. And that's not going to cut it. And the only other really relevant team now that SHR is gone is Front Row Motorsports. And I really like Front Row Motorsports lineup too. I am the biggest Todd Gilliland fan in the world. I think Zane Smith, he's got to figure out how to put things together in the first half of a season, because the last 2 years he started the first 4 months miserably and then picked things up. But Zane Smith has shown strides. Heck, he almost won at Bristol this year. Noah Gragson, of course, we've seen he won 9 races with Junior Motorsports in the Xfinity Series less than half a decade ago. So there are people who can perform on these teams, but I just don't really see a path where you have talent being fostered that's truly going to make the move up. Because think about all of the top prospects in the sport right now. Corey Heim and Brent Cruz are heir apparent at Toyota. Connor Zilich, Jesse Love, they're with Chevrolet. Brendan Queen, coming out of ARCA, could have been a potential option. He gets picked up by Colleague for their truck team. Suddenly he is in the Dodge Ram department. And as Ram gets more involved and Dodge gets more involved in the sport, you definitely expect some Cup teams, Xfinity teams to make the move over to that OEM. And then Brendan Queen's probably going to be locked up there. So what does Ford have? And I think it's a real big question. Now, Ryan Sieg Racing, in just the grand scheme of things, you might think doesn't mean that much, because, hey, it's essentially a Nepo team. Even though the 2 drivers are very good, they're not really signing guys from outside besides like CJ McLaughlin and Matt DiBenedetto over the years. It's just Ryan Sieg and Kyle Sieg. But when you look big picture, it's just yet another example of Ford as a manufacturer just becoming uninvolved with driver development, which while with the current format hasn't hurt them too much. They've won 3 of the last 4 championships, and Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney are 2 of the best drivers in the sport, no questions asked. There's got to be some questions to be asked because I just don't know where their direction lies. So I just wanted to bring that up. That was an interesting NASCAR nugget that dropped this week that I think had to be addressed. But we're going to take a break. When we come back, let's switch to Formula One because I got something to complain about. There is a Instagram repost from Oscar Piastri that everybody was freaking out about overnight, and I think it's being blown significantly out of proportion. So we're going to talk about that on the other side, plus get you set for the Vegas Grand Prix. Eddie Kalegi here with you on a abbreviated Friday episode of Motorsports Today on 88.7 FM, WRSU.org, always available on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, this is Tim Moore, and you're listening to Motorsports Today. Back to the show.
Back here live, Motorsports Today. Again, we have written content you can find on our website at motorsportstoday.net. Rohan Singh's been doing a great job with covering the F1 season. Also, follow us on the socials at Motorsports Today. We post clips from the show. A lot of people enjoyed our driver draft from Monday's episode. If you haven't seen that, it's on our socials at Motorsports Today. You can also watch the full episode on YouTube or listen on Spotify. I still believe my team was pretty stacked from that. Jimmy Johnson, Kyle Busch, Chase Elliott, and 2017 Martin Truex Jr. I mean, I locked in for that. I'm not randomly picking Alex Bowman like Tim or Tropper taking Ryan Newman over Ryan Blaney or Kurt Busch. I am very happy with my lineup. I believe I had the best lineup. So if you haven't checked it out, we got the graphic all over our socials. You can also follow along with our Motorsports Today NASCAR Season in Review series. We've been posting lots of interviews that Tropper and I did at Phoenix with various drivers on the Cup Series grid about their respective seasons. You can check that out. Talk to Alex Bowman, posted that yesterday. But we got to segue from NASCAR to Formula One because that's the series in action, and we are officially down to it. 3 races left to settle the championship. Lando Norris has taken a firm grasp of the championship, essentially a race-length advantage, 24 points over Oscar Piastri. Max Verstappen still mathematically in striking distance, but even with all the gap he made up on Piastri, he hasn't made it up at the rate that he needed on Lando Norris, and now needs disaster to strike for Lando in the last 3 races of the season to win the championship. And right now Norris looking really fast at Vegas after pacing second practice last night under the lights in Sin City. But the big story from last night involved Oscar Piastri because there was some people that took a look at his Instagram account, and I think it's very ironic how back in the day everybody would freak out about Twitter likes, and now Twitter you can't see people's likes. Instagram you used to not be able to see what people liked, and now not only can you see what people like, there's also this repost feature. And I don't know if this was a misclick or Oscar Piastri in a bad mood, but he reposted a quote from Bernie Eccleston on GP Fans Global, and it's a quote from an opinion article about Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris and the dynamic at McLaren, which has been well spoken about all through the year, even with them winning back-to-back Constructors Championships. And you know what, before I read it, let me just play our Road Rage intro because there's some complaining to do. What is this going to accomplish?
That is a horrible way to go about it.
We love racing, but sometimes things rub us the wrong way. How do you expect this kid to have any sort of confidence? It's completely ridiculous.
It was moronic. It was so stupid.
You can't make this up, and you can't excuse it either.
It's time for Road Rage on Motorsports Today. All right, so the quote says, McLaren prefers the English driver Norris. He has more star quality and marketing appeal for them, has more camera presence and publicity. That's probably why he's better for McLaren. So everybody, first of all, is freaking out that Oscar Piastri, when he's in the midst of the championship battle, is on his phone and on social media. Guess what? That's what athletes do. I am an Eagles fan. I've been watching A.J. Brown crash out the entire season while the Eagles are 8-2. People do this. And again, F1 is so buttoned up at times that the smallest thing people freak out about. But we got to dive a little more into the quote too, because they're basically insinuating that McLaren feels that Lando Norris is better for them because he's got a better marketing appeal. I don't feel like this is Oscar Piastri taking a shot at anybody. I think this is Oscar Piastri acknowledging a situation that McLaren, if anything, this is not a shot at Lando Norris. There are people that are kind of reading between the lines here. This is simply Oscar Piastri complaining about his current situation at McLaren, that he is aware of the fact that he feels like the team is favoring Lando Norris. Now, few things to complain about from different elements here. Number one, I think people are reading way too much into social media, and his PR team ended up removing that repost anyway. Also, who knows? Was that Oscar Piastri actually running his own account that reposted that? Was that someone that is his social media manager? You never know. So that could have just been, this could have just been simply a really ill-advised click from someone who works in Oscar Piastri's camp. It may not have even been him. So let's pump the brakes on all of that first. So that's element number one here. Element number two, I do want to acknowledge for the Oscar Piastri fans who are defending him, say he did repost this post, and they're like, oh, well, he's justified in being frustrated because they're handing Lando Norris the championship. I defend Piastri all the time. The only handing of the championship that's been done all season is Oscar Piastri handing the championship to Lando Norris by being absolutely terrible since Zandvoort. I mean, Oscar Piastri had a historic start to this season, won 5 of the first 7 Grand Prix, still was good during the summer, but it was clear that the gap had closed between him and Lando Norris, and you can make the argument that there were certain moments this year, as I have said on this show before, where McLaren favored Lando Norris over Oscar Piastri in terms of positioning their drivers, when to make swaps, and vice versa. And that's all true, and I still stand by that. But in spite of that, Oscar Piastri still found himself with a wide advantage in the championship, and after Lando had his DNF with 10 to go in the Dutch Grand Prix on August 31st, it felt like Oscar Piastri was fully in the driver's seat with more than a race advantage. And what does he do from there? Become irrelevant, not challenge for wins, get himself penalized making a stupid move at Brazil, crashing on the first lap of the first turn in Baku, and just do absolutely flat out nothing, while Lando Norris has performed very, very well, and Max Verstappen has performed very, very well, and Oscar Piastri, right now as of late, has been worse than Lando, worse than Max, and I'd argue worse than George and Charles Leclerc too, and that is why he's lost the championship. McLaren favoring Lando Norris has not cost Oscar Piastri this championship. It is not a close enough gap to be able to say that, because he has been bleeding points. He's a full race back, and I'd venture to say he's going to end up being a whole lot more than 24 back in 16 days when the season wraps up in Abu Dhabi, because that's just the way things have been trending. So I think there's got to be some conversations had here. So everybody freaking out about this post and Oscar Piastri reposting this. Number one, we don't know if Oscar Piastri actually did that himself. Number two, he's not taking a shot at Lando Norris. He's taking a shot at McLaren. And number three, for the people defending him, let's be real here, Oscar Piastri has choked away the championship. It's not Lando Norris being aided by McLaren to take it. Lando Norris has just done better with the great equipment they have than Oscar Piastri. Since September, Oscar Piastri has been far from championship caliber. Lando Norris, on the other hand, complain about his race starts all you want. Complain about how he really fumbled the bag last year against Verstappen. Since September 1st, Lando Norris has been a championship caliber driver. And I have been critical of Lando Norris on this show off and on for the last 2 years. But you got to admit when you're wrong, and you got to acknowledge things too. And you have to acknowledge that in the last 2 months, in the last 6 races, Lando Norris has been the best driver on the F1 grid, and Oscar Piastri has not even been the second best driver on the grid. I'd say 5th. I'll be generous and give him 3rd, but I'd say 5th because he's made a whole lot more mistakes than George Russell and Charles Leclerc during that stretch. So, leaving it at that post everybody freaking out about Oscar Piastri doing that. Social media, people use it, and it might have been one of his handlers anyway, instead of him that reposted it, so at the end of the day, what does it even matter? But the real story is actually on track, and right now, from this weekend, after the first 2 practice sessions, Oscar Piastri has not been in the same area code as Lando Norris, and he needs to be not just in the same area code, but far ahead of him because he's a race behind. So things are going to have to change quick for McLaren's Oscar Piastri. For Lando Norris, just business as usual, and he can find himself as the newest world champion, ending the 4-year streak of Max Verstappen. Can't clinch it this weekend, but certainly can next week in Qatar. And that's what we'll take one more break and then come back. And I'll get you all geared up for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, third to last race of the 2025 F1 season. What to expect, who's going to run well, who's going to win it all. Stay tuned. I'll get you ready for the Las Vegas GP on the other side. Eddie Kalegi here with you on Motorsports Today, live on 88.7 FM, WRSU.org, always available on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Spotify. This is Eddie Kalegi, and you're tuned in to Motorsports Today. Now, back to the show.
Back here live for a little I Got This Feeling to wrap up this Friday episode of Motorsports Today, a week before Thanksgiving, which means NFL football, college football, feast week in college basketball, but now motorsports has its own stamp on U.S. Thanksgiving because just 5 days before Turkey Day is the annual Las Vegas Grand Prix, which was renewed with its contract through 2027, so there will be at least 2 more iterations of this event, and I just hope it happens more. Let me just start this conversation with that. For the people who complain that there's too many races in the states, that the U.S. gets 3 Grand Prix, it's very easy to cut it to 2. Get rid of Miami. Miami is so much worse than Las Vegas. The track isn't any better than Vegas. It just feels very out of place. Vegas is such a sight to see. And I know F1, it feels like, we talked about this on the show on Monday with TCB, that it seemed like the tickets were not being sold very well because all leading up to this week, the F1 Twitter account was still actively promoting ticket sales and trying to get people to buy tickets to the race, which was a little perplexing to say the least. But when the tickets are $1,600, that's to be expected. But in any event, that exists, was something to be talked about. That was something I mentioned on Monday. But the race itself, the sights, driving down the Las Vegas Strip. I saw the onboard. Apparently they're touching 220 miles an hour down the Las Vegas Strip. What a sight to see. And it makes me very happy sometimes to see that the F1 elitists crying about Las Vegas and the pageantry simply isn't there. You know what? If you want races in America, that's what you're going to get. So I love the fact that some of the F1 elitists are a little caught off guard by Las Vegas because it's certainly not a luxurious city. I was there for an entire week last year. I had a very good time, but it is not on the same level as some of these cities that we see F1 race at on the calendar every year. That being said, I think the circuit is good. I think the circuit's getting better. I just hate the fact that it's gotten kind of a raw deal at times. We all know what happened 2 years ago with the potholes on the track. And then, of course, there's rain this week. And from my experience there with Johnny Vasquez during the Players Era Festival last year, when it rains, it truly pours in Las Vegas because the drainage system is so bad, because it rains so little, they're not prepared. So what was really just a drizzle just turned into puddles this one day when we were walking around the Las Vegas Strip. It was like, I think it was like a Tuesday afternoon before Thanksgiving last year. And just the way that there was standing water from what was not much more than a mist was crazy. And that's why there's all these videos floating around of the flooding this week in Vegas. And of course, the F1 elitists are like, see, it's a sign we shouldn't be racing here. You know what? If you want to get rid of a U.S. Grand Prix, get rid of Miami because it pales in comparison to this. Under the lights at Las Vegas is maybe the most visually appealing track that F1 has. And I still think the circuit is pretty good. Now, it's pretty narrow. The passing zones aren't great, but hey, that's That's half the F1 schedule. Let's be real here. I don't think Las Vegas is that much terribly worse in that category. And I also think there's something to be said about learning a circuit. Look through the last few years in F1. Not very often that a new street circuit has a ton of passing the first couple of years because the drivers are still figuring it out and learning where the passing zones truly are. That's not something you're necessarily just taught when you're dropped into a track the first time. There's learning to it. Obviously, there's going to be a couple of passing zones that just jump out based on the shape of the track, but you're going to learn more about building runs and about actually making passes as you get the experience actually racing on the track. So time will tell, but I think for right now, Las Vegas is on an upward trajectory. The rain was a bit of a concern because, as I said, the infrastructure there with water is not great, but looking at the forecast, I just checked it. There's a little bit of rain this morning, but skies will clear up tonight, and then tomorrow night, perfectly clear. A little chilly, only about 50 degrees, but will be rain-free for the rest of the weekend for qualifying and the race in the Las Vegas Grand Prix. That I really like this, and I'm glad it's become an annual tradition, and I think it's a perfect spot for a street race for F1. Again, a market that's not really fully targeted by American motorsport. You have Las Vegas Motor Speedway for NASCAR, but it's a little out of the outskirts of the actual city, and IndyCar doesn't race at Las Vegas anymore, so this is kind of uncharted waters, especially since the West Coast, especially the populated part of the West Coast, feels largely forgotten about at times by both NASCAR and IndyCar in terms of their scheduling. So having a motorsports race of any kind, especially something with the grandeur of F1, I think is just a net positive for not just F1, but for the American motorsports community altogether. So I'll leave it at that on that. Let's get into the race itself. It's very interesting when I was looking at the stats here. Nobody's finished on the podium in both races. It was George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz last year. Verstappen started up at the front, lost some ground, had a bad pit stop, ended up settling for fifth, but it was one of those many races where Lando Norris simply didn't capitalize and help Max seal up his fourth straight World Drivers' Championship. Year before that, though, Max Verstappen cruised to victory, and it indeed helped seal up his third straight World Drivers' Championship as he ended up beating Charles Leclerc and his teammate Sergio Perez. So there is not a single driver who's finished on the podium in both races. Now let me first start ruling out a few teams that I don't really think are going to be major factors. Mercedes hasn't shown a ton of speed. Kimi Antonelli was second fastest in second practice, but George Russell ninth and seventh in the two practices. I don't like reading too much into Formula One practice because what I have seen, particularly with Max Verstappen, is that he'll be irrelevant on Friday and dominant on Sunday, and he's not the outlier here. A lot of drivers simply perform much better as the weekend progresses. So I wouldn't rule out George Russell, but I think last year was a very big pressure point for Mercedes. They wanted to close out the year strong. They wanted to see if they could somehow keep tabs on the Constructors' Championship. They also wanted one more good moment with Lewis Hamilton, the driver that got to his seventh World Championship with the organization that was on his way out, and they got that with the 1-2 finish. I don't really think they're going to be as relevant. Obviously, Carlos Sainz is in a Williams now, not a Ferrari, so I'd kind of rule him out too, though I think he'll have a pretty solid run, and he finished sixth there the first time around, so he's actually got, I believe, the third best average finish of anyone in the field. Someone that I am really interested in this weekend, I think has a lot of upside because with all of the words and all of the chatter around John Elkann ripping on his drivers, I like Charles Leclerc this weekend. And you might say, Eddie, I know a month ago you were going crazy on the show. You were saying that Charles Leclerc is underperforming. And that's true. Charles Leclerc he has the build, he has the team, he should be the driver from that era that has a world championship right now, not what Lando Norris is going to be in 2 weeks. And he doesn't have that. So, of course, he's underperformed. But Charles Leclerc, the last couple of races, has been the second fastest car 2 weeks in a row. You could argue even 3. Last week should have had a great run and then gets taken out by Oscar Piastri. So he's very frustrated about that. Plus, he's mad that John Elkann's telling him that he's not focusing. And I think he's more capable than Lewis Hamilton, even though Lewis finished second last year. My very bold prediction this weekend is that we get a podium sweep from Ferrari. I think Ferrari is going to get both their cars on the podium. I think Max Verstappen is going to be off the podium, which might be a crazy take, but it happened last year. He was fast, and he ended up finishing 5th. I got this feeling that Charles Leclerc is going to win the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Make it 3 years, 3 different winners, 3 different constructors winning in Sin City. I think Lewis Hamilton gets a 3rd-place finish. I think this is the week Ferrari puts it together. Leclerc's been fast. Hamilton has run well at this track before. I think in the bright lights of Vegas, Ferrari is going to shine, and I think they are going to get their moment because John Elkann, I don't want to credit him because he shouldn't have said what he said, but if anything, he put a fire in his drivers, one that's a 7-time world champion and one who has the resume to be a champion but has underperformed through the years, to both run well and end this year strong, especially since Ferrari now has drifted to 4th in the constructors standings, but 2nd is still in reach. 3rd certainly is. They're only 4 points behind Red Bull, which is basically just Verstappen. They're only a little more than a race behind Mercedes. They can catch Mercedes. They're 36 points back. If you get a 1st and a 3rd here, that puts a significant dent. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying Charles Leclerc wins. I'm saying Lewis Hamilton gets 3rd. Now, who gets 2nd? I said it's not going to be Verstappen. I don't think it's going to be Piastri. I just think Lando Norris has the pieces put together right now to close this year out strong. He can taste the championship. I've seen him flounder before. I think he's going to flounder a race win, but I still think he's going to finish 2nd and put himself in position where he can clinch his first World Drivers' Championship at Qatar and become the first driver not named Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen to hoist the WDC trophy since Nico Rosberg in 2016. So those are my picks. Charles Leclerc to win it and become the 3rd different winner of the Las Vegas Grand Prix tomorrow night. Lando Norris finishes 2nd, extends his gap over Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri, and Lewis Hamilton gets on the podium for a Ferrari 1, 2, 3. And that's going to do it for this episode of Motorsports Today. Monday, we will be live on TikTok at 7 p.m. I won't be there, but Adam Tropper, Tim Moore, TCB, the team, they will recap everything from Las Vegas. Also get you set for what's to come with the penultimate race of the season at Qatar. And we are less than 2 weeks away from the scheduled start of the much-anticipated hearings and trial in the NASCAR versus 2311 Racing charter lawsuit that has been talked about since last October, and it's finally going to be happening and could really shake up the way NASCAR is arranged, distributed, and also impact the future of 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports. And we will have coverage of that for you. But that's going to do it for this edition of Motorsports Today. Again, find us on the web at motorsportstoday.net. Find us on the socials at Motorsports Today. If you're listening live on WRSU, the student section with Nick Hart and Sean Newcomb is coming up at the top of the hour. But I am Eddie Kalegi signing off on Motorsports Today, reminding you, as always, to enjoy the weekend and enjoy the racing.